So it's Remembrance Sunday today. Now, I want to tell you about something that I did last week. Last week, I did a special service to say goodbye to someone really special. He was my Uncle Alec. I say uncle, but he was like a family friend. I've always known him. I can't remember a time when I didn't know him. His parents and my parents were really good friends, and his daughters were like cousins to us. We went on holiday together and knew each other. So he was dear old Uncle Alec, quite a bit older than my dad actually, because he'd fought in the Second World War and as a single man and married when he came back. But as you can see, it was a really special service because he had a guard of honour. He was in the Airborne Regiment, one of the Airborne regiments. We had a bugler, and so during the service, the bugler did the last post, and that was quite something. He stood at the back, and this is my Uncle Alec. I think probably 10 years or so. He was 101, so I don't think he was quite 101 then. But I want to tell you a bit about the story about Uncle Alec, because when we think of Remembrance Day, and we think of soldiers who went and fought in the war, soldiers who laid down their lives, it sometimes seems a long way away from us. And you know, Uncle Alec was such a modest man. He never made much of his story, and it's only just come out in the last few years. It's particularly after he died, because it was in the paper. But he fought in the Second World War. He joined the army when he was 18. That's a picture of him when he was a young man. He was always a good-looking fella. He reminded me a bit of Reg Varney from On the Buses. If you call Reg Varney a good-looking fella. And one thing that he really wanted to do, he cared deeply for people. And you know, they asked him what he wanted to do, and he said, I want to treat the injured. I want to help people. And so they brought him into the medical corps. They were part of that regiment. And that's him with his fellow trainees. And he trained to be a nurse, to care for people when they were injured on the battlefield. Now, 1944, that was near the end of the war. And I don't know if you'd have heard about this history, but there was a big thing that happened. There was a big general. Well, he was a small man, but he was a big, very important general called Montgomery. And he wanted to do something to try and make the war finish more quickly. And they called it Operation Market Garden. And he volunteered for this. He volunteered to be part of this, and the idea was the troops were coming through Belgium, up through Holland, and be part of the war effort there. And most of them were sent in by parachute. Do you fancy being on a parachute? But they were in planes and jumped out. Well, my Uncle Alec wasn't skilled as a parachuter, but he came in on a glider and landed there somewhere quite well up in Holland. It was near a place called Arnhem, where everything went wrong. Now, I don't know if you would have known this at school, but in a place called Arnhem in Holland, the soldiers were marching, and then they got to a bridge, and the Germans came, and there were just too many of them, and they had to go back. They had to retreat. And my uncle was there under fire, caring for people who were injured. And in fact, his friend was really badly injured. His leg was injured, and so straight away, he gave 3 pints of his blood, which saved that man's life. And then, after that, he marched carrying stretchers. He's just an incredible guy. And they went back a bit of a way and set up a big hospital camp to treat the injured. And the general said, look, you've been part of a big battle. You've been part of something really big. You can leave if you like. We can get you home. But you know what my Uncle Alec did? He said, no, I want to stay and care for the injured. And he did that, but actually it was very costly to him, because soon the Germans arrived and he was taken prisoner. And he was put in a prisoner of war camp, and he was there for about a year. And I know when he looked back on it, he knew it was that period of time. But at that point, he didn't know how long he'd be there or whether he'd get out of there alive. And apparently, there were 3,000 men in that camp, and they lived on turnips. That's all they ate all the time. One morning, they woke up and the Germans had gone. Now, there's two reasons for this. One probably is that the war was over, or, that part of the war was over, D-Day had happened. But do you know what I think the other reason is? I can't prove it. I think the turnips probably helped, Imagine 3,000 men eating turnips every day, all day, for all their meals. Yeah, well, that's my theory anyway. But he was free. But the problem is, they were free, but they didn't know where to go and what to do. And apparently they wandered around in rags for 3 weeks until they spotted a tank. It would be the Americans, wouldn't it? The Americans rescued them. And then they took him to be with the British soldiers. They said, Alec, or Private Hall, or Sergeant Hall, whatever he was, you can go home now. But you know what? He said no. He said, no, I want to stay here and care for the injured. Now, he was a remarkable man. That's not a picture of him, but that's the kind of thing that he did. And my dad used to say to me, your Uncle Alec was one of the bravest soldiers there was. Because he couldn't carry a gun, he couldn't defend himself because he had to carry medical things, he had to carry stretchers, which meant he was in a lot of danger. So every day, he was putting himself at risk to help people. He wanted to treat people. Well, he lived till he was 101. He lived through the war. That's a picture of him in 2004. He went back to Arnhem to mark the anniversary, a special anniversary. Would that have been 40 or 50 years or 60? My maths has never been very good. Trevor will tell you that. And that's him 2 years ago with some other people there. And we gather from his regiment, he was the last veteran. So it was really special for me to be able to do a service for not only someone that I really liked, really loved and cared for, and who was part of our family, in effect, but also for someone who was one of the last people, one of the last what we call veterans from the war. But I've been thinking about Uncle Alec. I've been thinking about how every day he went out and put himself in danger. And he turned down opportunities to come home. First of all, he said he wanted to go and be part of that, to look after people. He volunteered. And then when they said you can go home, he didn't, because he wanted to care for people. And when his friend was injured, he gave his blood. And it reminded me of a verse in the Bible. Words of Jesus. He said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Now, of course, Jesus was talking about himself. He was talking about how he was going to go to the cross. And I know that my Uncle Alec actually survived. I'm really glad that he didn't literally lay down his life. I'm really glad he came back alive, because I might look old, but actually I'm not old enough to have lived through the war. That was before my time. But I'm really glad of that. But, in a sense, every day he did lay down his life. Every day he went out in the battlefield to rescue people. And I was thinking about that, and it made me think about Jesus. It made me think about how Jesus said yes. He wanted to come to this world to rescue us. And of course, Jesus did literally lay down his life on the cross. So today, we remember people who laid down their lives so that we could be free. But also, we do remember people like Uncle Alec who actually survived, who lived through the war, but gave up a lot. And he had to struggle with a lot of things after he got back. But also, we remember that Jesus laid down his life for us. Jesus came into this world to rescue us. All the problems and all the sufferings of this world, Jesus came into this world and suffered. And Jesus is with us now. So remember that for this Remembrance Sunday.